Record on this computer, which is always my cue to stop the screen share. And I'm going to spotlight myself just for a moment and say, welcome everyone to this week's weekly briefing. If you're a member of RevCommunity and you're here, welcome. If you're new, welcome. I'm joined by Tim, of course, and also I reached out to Aaron Sorofsky today and said, "Hey, Aaron, could you join us for this conversation because I feel like you have a perspective that we'd love to hear from. So please say hello, Aaron.
Hi, everybody.
How are you today? And how's things in Chicago?
Things are good. Spring has sprung a little, even though we took a little step back temperature-wise today, but it's good.
And let me see, Tim. Are you? I'm trying to find you. There you are. I got to spotlight Tim.
I'm over
Yay! There
here.
he is. Okay, Tim, say
Yeah.
hello.
Hey, it's good to see everybody. I'm with you, Aaron. Like spring is here.
I'm happy. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're like in spring break central down in LA area, and the streets are busy. It's kind of fun. It
Yeah.
it it honestly feels like compared to a year ago, which I know we're going to talk about, very very familiar, kind of sweet. People out doing things. It's nice. It's nice to see it happening.
Well, our agenda for today's call was we are at about this roughly 1 year anniversary. I almost hate to call it that because that almost sounds like it's something that we're celebrating. But
We got
it was,
pandemic versary.
yeah, I mean, about a year ago, everything started to change and the world started to kind of shut down. And here we are a year later, and we're starting to reflect on this, right? And when I thought of having this conversation today, Tim, you and I said, yeah, let's talk about this. Let's talk about not only what changed, but more importantly, hey, where are we today, and what have we learned so that we can continue moving forward together as an industry, as individual businesses. And then, Aaron, you were gracious enough to say, "Sure, I'll join into that conversation and let me kind of put you on the in the hot seat." But I want to open this conversation up to everyone here. So if you have a thought or comment, I may even call on you and say, "Hey, what about you? What's your perspective on what has changed and where you are now?" I'm also especially keen to hear, why are you excited? Like, what about the future has you excited? So, with that, uh, Aaron, can I just start off by asking you,
Yeah.
if can you even sum it up? Like,
Ooh.
what more than anything changed for you over this past year?
Well, not being immersed. Well, for me personally, like not being immersed in studio life gave
Mm,
me a lot more time to work on stuff that I normally neglect. At the
okay.
studio. So I took really like a lot of stock in we were about to go into a branding thing about the company, and I took a lot of time to think about who we are, what we were making, who we were talking to, all of that. And just having the time and space to kind of like break away and do that work was really great. So that changed for me, but also like the structure of the industry kind of changed. Like
Yeah.
now from like a work standpoint, like we have access to artists all around the world, because our infrastructure is completely different and totally flexible to do that. We had some of our internal artists, like Joar was working in Portugal for a good chunk of the time. um, Very few people actually stayed where they were. Like people went home or popped around to different family members. So we were able to build like a very nimble infrastructure that could accommodate any artist anywhere. Um, and while I don't think that it'll change what I want from a company culture perspective of having a studio where people congregate and do work, and I miss that like life and lifestyle, the ability to pop anybody into our production pipeline at any point during the pipeline, not just the beginning for storyboards or
Mm,
motion test, has completely changed the the staffing model or perspective, or the idea that you need to have more space for some reason. You just need more computers. And let's just be honest, like that's changing too. Eventually there's going to be virtual workstations. So,
interesting point. Okay,
you
that's an
know,
interesting point because you've probably heard the conventional wisdom now has arrived on this idea that COVID didn't really in and of itself change things. It rather accelerated so many changes that were already in process, right? And I'm curious, because to hear you talk about even remote workstations, do you feel like this shift to, I don't know, call it fully decentralized? I don't know if remote is even the right word, but whatever that changes, do you think that was something that had been in the works at Swarovski and then COVID just pushed it to like, oh, we've got to figure this out now. We got to figure this out 3 years or 5 years ahead of schedule?
It was definitely in the works, but that's just because my IT team is always kind of trying to think about ways to future proof a little bit, to say like,
Yeah.
Why are we investing in technology that's going to be gone in 5 years or 3 years, or if we're just essentially rendering, like what does that mean? Yeah, it's like that rent buy kind of conversation we're always having, and then well, at some point we're not even going to have to maintain this. Like most of your renders you could just send out anyway. I mean, we have to deal with high security stuff, but even that's being managed and worked out now. So
Yeah, that's interesting because we have a few. I have more than a few clients and friends that run shops that are in those high security, doing movie trailers or things for Apple and stuff like that. And I will say, some of those security standards have even loosened or become. I won't say lax. That's not the right word, but
they definitely haven't laxed. I would say they've
right.
evolved.
They've evolved, right?
They've
Right.
evolved, but those people knew to continue making things, they were going to have to continue to evolve.
And that's actually an interesting, we could almost spend a little side note or take a rabbit trail here, because there are sometimes people are forced to make decisions like around security, right? Where if the Apples of the world or the movie studios of the world have these incredibly oppressive or difficult to handle security standards, and then COVID forces them to say, well, gosh, if everyone's working remotely, we can sit here and have our little temper tantrum about how we need you guys to all be in a room that's safe and lockboxed. But they just realized if we do that, no one's going to do our stuff. We're not going to be able to get our thing. And so they had to evolve. And that's just an interesting point, that think of all these other things. I don't know, like payment terms, getting paid for pitches, that are all these other industry things that annoy us, that we say, oh gosh, it'll never change. And I don't know, maybe those things will change in the future.
Yeah. Oh my God, paid for pitches.
That's right. I know. Well, that's such an easy one. Hey Tim, welcome back.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah. No, I mean, everybody had to evolve their thinking and what was required of them. A lot of, I think, the ownership of the security fell on the studio. And I think what the studio kind of passing it, I call myself a studio, to the studio or the production company. And I think what they realize is that it's going to have to be personal. Every person working on the job is going to have to take responsibility. So there were a lot of things like when you read these contracts that were like, okay, like background checks are going to be a thing. Every company is going to be required to do background checks that do this kind of work, so that I don't know what they're going to do with that information. Like you can't really once you do a background check, you have this information that you just wish you didn't have, because you can't really do anything about anything. You know what I mean? That's like a whole other can of worms, but they're going to require that kind of stuff of people. And then the terms, the contracts that those people sign with us, or the confidentiality agreements, they're going to accept ownership of the responsibility of like, hey, is your workstation facing a window? If it is, and somebody takes a picture of it, it's not just the studio is going to be responsible, but you, Aaron Swarovski, are going to be responsible for that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's almost too like, I agree. It's been spread out to every individual, but also I feel like the studio, we'll say like the client studio or the agency that you're working for, has also learned something in this time of what is necessary, and possibly what has to, like a reality of what has to be let go.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to get a project delivered and we're working at a different kind of economy, hey, it turns out not everyone stole everyone's stuff, or hey, it turns out no matter what the situation is, there's some good people out there, and we kind of work through this together on both sides of it. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of really excited about really the speed at which some of that stuff happened that would have never happened, in 100 years in the other way. And all of a sudden we were able to kind of snap things together So yeah, I think you're right. There's gonna be like a scope creep of things like that comes in. I also feel like the individual kind of taking ownership is exciting. I don't know what's going to happen to like the economy, because in our world, that's the commodity we trade. And I've heard more and more the individuals are working for more than one client in a day now, because they're just working from home. They could do 2, 3, not just projects, but 2, 3 different clients. Very, very cool, very interesting, very different. That's going to affect rates and time and contracts and dedication and full-time employment. That, you know, that's going to be a lot of things going to be impacted from those kind of revelations as well.
Yeah. Well, that creeps up on people, you know, and that's essentially the pivot from being a freelancer to becoming a company, not just like on paper, but like if you start juggling multiple jobs than you should be handling, you're going to have to bring in an extra person to do a roto or to do this. And there it is. There you go. You're on your way. And that's when all the little pillars start falling and they bring in another buddy to help with this. And either they hit a wall and they realize like, oh man, I just want to do my day and make my $750 or whatever it is. Or I want to go down the rabbit hole, and is the risk worth the reward of building a company, you know?
So I follow this investment group called Andreessen Horowitz. Mark Andreessen, founder of Netscape back in the day, invented cloud computing. You know, I don't know. He was one of those social media engineers. Like he clearly has some play out in what's happening on the planet, and they invest now in large companies, many of which we've all heard of. They did a survey recently of their portfolio, and they asked these, again, Fortune 500, Fortune 200 companies that they've invested in, are you going to go back to work? And they said 50% of their portfolio is saying, we're going to go back to work. The other half is saying, we're not going to go back to work. And I think in that case, there's even a higher percentage that said, like, we're never going to go back to work at the same level. So what about you, Aaron? Where are you falling in that? Are you going back to work? Did you learn something new and kind of live within this new freedom that you found, or eager to get back in a studio?
Going back to work, meaning going back to like the actual studio paradigm.
Yeah, the studio space. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're going to go back to work. And yet we're going to have way more flexibility to grow bigger, stronger, wider when we need to because of this. So what I always said when I bought the building is that, like, I love that I bought a building because that defines how big we're going to get. You know, like, yeah, you can't get any more workstations and all of that. That's just like been super blown out of the water because that no longer defines how big we're going to get. So like this kind of girdle I put on the company is no longer there. And that's fascinating, right? But for me personally, as like the figurehead and owner, the space and the culture is very important. So until mentally I shift into like growing for volume because I'm maybe posturing to do something other, right? Like then that's kind of.
Do you have a timeline? Like what's the process when you imagine asking your employees, hey, come back into the space, let's work together? Are you waiting for like the opportune moment, like a project? Are you going to choose a specific date or criteria?
No, we're slow rolling. We are 100% slow rolling. Nobody will be forced to come back. Yeah.
It's like, so again, if I was compared like a year ago, I'd feel like people were afraid of this idea that they were going to work from home. And now when given an opportunity to almost get back in the office, it's like,
but the reasoning is different. Like now it's liability. Like I don't want to tell anybody they have to come back because one, personally, I don't want to be responsible for them coming back and something bad happening. Especially if they didn't feel comfortable doing that. So that's where I'm coming from on it. Like, you know, right now we're working on a return to work plan and I'm hoping that it can include a vaccination requirement. right? So just in case they're listening,
Yeah,
it's
I think
gonna
that's
legally,
gonna be a legal, that's gonna be
it's a
interesting
legal
legal.
decision,
Yeah,
right?
because HIPAA basically says, you can't, it's not
Right.
your business.
None
Yeah.
of my business, but
And it's also, it's not your liability too. I think that there is some reality to almost saying, please don't ever make it my liability. Don't ever make it my liability, because this or every other pandemic in the future now, it's going to be, what do you have to have insurance policy against? Like, I think for all of
there
our
will
health,
be insurance for this, because guess what? In my last review with Chubb, they were asking me essentially if I wanted the Weinstein policy, which is coverage in case somebody comes back at me for doing something inappropriate, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, no, because if I did something inappropriate, I fucking deserve it. You know what I mean? Like,
the people that have that policy are the people we should be investigating.
Exactly. I was like, no, but I can't. And then, after 9/11, there was a terrorism policy that you have to, if you opt out of, you have to sign, of course, a very special piece of paper that says you're opting out of it. There's all of this stuff that, yes, there are going to be policies for that.
Of course,
but
there's going to be lots of money to be made.
Oh yeah. I don't want to be personally responsible for, that requirement, and everything we do will be kosher with the laws as my lawyer sees them to be. And there's two things I would like, and that's one, I would like to require the vaccine, for especially if it's within, the government saying like a little wishy-washy about it. I would like to be able to require it. And then two, everybody's proven though that they can work from home. So there really is no rush back. So for me, it's in a slow roll.
Yeah. I'll just say you probably mean the vaccine or some equivalent, right? There are obviously people that know they'll be in harm's way if something were to happen. And, mandatory health issues are never something you want to make as a policy anyway. Like, you have to have your ear pierced or whatever. You don't want anything like that. So to say, hey, there's obviously a situation here where we have to be aware of each other, and there's an equivalent. Let's just make sure there's an equivalent to it. Yeah, that's smart.
So I'll be advised, and I won't do anything inappropriate. But if somebody is or has somebody in their house that is not vaccinated, they're not going to want to come back to work. So I'm not going to force them to come back.
Yeah.
So
how about economically? There's another part of what I've seen a lot play out over the last year is, again, from the very beginning, there was this major hit of fear that there will never be money again, right? Oh my gosh, everything is stopped. To now there's $3 trillion extra dollars in the economy, and some very weird economic things are happening. And some of my concern is that, or some of, I'll just say forethought here of what could happen, is that we've given people a lot of flexibility in the workplace. So the amount of hours they put in, which thank God, I'm all for it. I honestly, RevThink has been that way from day one. So I think that's a very smart way of working. The value proposition is very cool. But that person being able to manage their time or manage resources, but also I feel that the economy is pushing rates into different situations. So now we have a burden to get people back into a workplace. We have a burden of security and security needs that are going to happen. We're going to have an insurance policy, a new insurance policy we have to cover, and rates are changing too. And I'm wondering, as a business owner, are you feeling that? Can you see that coming? Are you starting to recognize that in your negotiations?
I mean, we haven't upped our rates in a really long time. And so that's something that we're talking about doing, I think, or in the process of doing. But also people want things boiled down a little bit simpler. So what's going to go into a designer hour is just going to be a lot more. We're not going to separate rendering out and do certain things like that, just overly simplify. So that's going to be just a lot of communicating with our clients. Yeah, it's going to cost a little bit more. Our rates haven't gone up in a little while. I haven't seen rates for freelancers changing. There was there was a big shift a few years ago where people making like 250 a day were all of a sudden making 450. People making 450 were all of a sudden asking for 750. People asking for 750 were also of a sudden asking for 1250. And I think that, I mean, I can be wrong, but I think that's like really when advertising agencies started hiring motion design people and editors and things like that. They really just ballooned up rates like crazy. And so I haven't seen it go up, really since then. I mean, people certainly up their rates the more experience they have, but
Yeah.
I haven't noticed that.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, Aaron. I'm kind of curious, something you said earlier that I thought was really interesting when you were talking about the studio. And I was wondering, wait, does she mean the building? Or does she mean something else? Because when you talk about freelancers, you talk about staff. I'm almost wondering, like, is the meaning of the word studio evolving in your mind? Like, what defines a
cool
studio?
idea.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, what defines a studio? And if I have a studio and it's, say I'm Aaron and I have maybe an EP and a business manager, but everyone else is freelance. Like all the creatives are freelance. Is that a studio or is that something else?
Well, I
Any
think,
thoughts on that?
yeah, and I think it's something that you guys actually talk about quite a bit that really resonates with me. When you have too many freelancers, there's this retained knowledge that is lost, And if you are going to be a studio that leans primarily on freelance workforce, or just pushing things through, even I know people that just like send things overseas and just like essentially creative directed, but are the studio of it. And it's like that does encompass the definition of a studio. But I think for clients that, especially repeat clients, that's going to become very, very obvious very quickly. When every time you get another piece for the same account in and the type isn't right again, and this isn't right again, and you're not following brand standards again, like the efficiencies to my studio and how I'm able to like really make money is like you have some tentpole people on specific accounts, and that retained knowledge just kind of makes the job run super, super smoothly, especially with your lead creative and your producer. That stuff is in lockstep. So
yeah, I'm kind of curious, and I see other folks here. Like I see Ed from Spilt, and who else was I? Oh, I saw Ted here, and even Dallas, if Dallas is still with us. But I'm just curious if anyone has a thought on this. Like, is there a change underway that what the definition of a studio is changing, right? And I'm wondering if this whole remote and virtual and decentralized thing on the one hand has been great, but I wonder if as it plays out over time, could it have an adverse impact on what makes a studio magical? Because I think to your point, Aaron, if you have a studio and it's all freelancers, yes, in the short term you can run that, you can manage that, and that's certainly one choice that every owner has, that prerogative. But I can't help but think that, yes, over time, there's a certain soul that will be lacking. There's a point of view and a why and a mission and a purpose that's shared, and that there's got to be some sort of a cohesive, retained value that maybe as we get through the pandemic, we'll have to find this new balance and to make the best of both.
Yeah, Joel, imagine the people that are just starting into the workforce too. You just graduated from school or you're just starting your business. Even if you just do it in the next year or 2 years, your understanding of engagement and community and overall like grit that you get in a workspace, it's absolutely different. I feel the difference just from 20 years ago to now of how we actually had to touch physical film. We had to move videotapes from one room to the other. Like there are some physical things we used to do and which required interaction with people, and to lose some of that connectivity to what you're actually making from the physical presence. Like it's very, very kind of curious. I think that idea of like the word studio is evolving is an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, like for better or worse, named the studio after myself. So I like to think of myself as a figurehead and set kind of like a creative standard. And also in recruiting, I feel like I recruit through a certain lens, and that adds to the perspective of the studio. I think that has to like be maintained. It seems like every studio that does that is becomes like a legacy kind of studio, you know.
Hey, I saw
Yeah.
Ted just turn on his camera. Can I drag you into this chat here, Ted?
Yeah, sure. I unmuted, but then I realized my heat turned on right when I unmuted myself. But yeah,
Good to see
it's
you.
interesting top.
Yeah, good to see you, by the
Good to
way.
see you. Yeah.
Cool. I'd love to get your thoughts because I'm sure you guys at Block and Tackle have been through some of these similar changes and transitions, and like where are you
Yeah.
now? Where do you think things are going?
Well, it's interesting when you're talking about, I guess the feeling of the studio in a remote setup. And I think I can only speak for our studio that it has been actually really great. I mean, we were not like a super fun studio. We're like sort of have fun, but it's like always centered around the work. Like we don't really do outings. We have lunch once in a while. We're only like 10 people, but I almost feel like we're more connected now because like, this is my shitty Zoom background that I blurred so you don't really see, but people in the studio have a privilege of seeing like what this is. And it's more like, we've invited each other into our homes in a way that didn't happen at all before.
Interesting.
I mean, you really can't replace the in-person aspect, but
And what about what about the whole going back to work, going back to the office or the studio, if we use that word? What do you guys see coming?
I mean, we're in a similar boat as like, it's perfect opportunity to kind of redefine, your workday, redefine your job, redefine your office. I mean, now is the time. Like it's a clean slate almost. Like nobody's at the studio now. Any return back is going to be new and different. So why not take advantage of making the best for me and in turn everyone else?
And do you know,
I mean,
what does take advantage mean? Like, what do you mean take advantage of?
I mean, that's the tricky part because, I have children and wife and like a place where I wouldn't mind staying all the time. But, we have younger employees who want that community and want that, like, go out after work, goof off with your colleagues. So it's that balance. Can we make a hybrid situation where we're in the office sometime and at home sometime? But, we're figuring it out now. Like Aaron was saying, it's a slow roll back in. We're not rushing it.
Joel, Ted might be onto something in that idea that studio really is a room in our house now. Like part of our architecture is going to be a camera-ready environment that we can walk into and conduct business, but it's a safe place that no one's going to walk around in their underwear or to be making breakfast behind you.
That's cool. That's actually a really cool thought because I was just thinking, well, you're right. I mean, I got my whole new office all set up, and it's like an extension of our studio or offices or what have you. And I'm wondering, like, Aaron, does that resonate with you? That maybe studio is defined as, of course, it's the people. Yes, it's a place, but the place is now maybe a building in Chicago, but it's also the places where the people live.
Yes and no. I think like my ideal world would be like a bit of this, a bit of that. Like Ted was spot on. Like I have a daughter now. The thing I'm gonna look back on COVID is that I got to spend 2 to 3, probably 2 to 4 with her, and that's an amazing thing. The one thing that it really has cut everything out of is travel. Like I'm not going to like unnecessary client presentations. I'm doing things on Zoom now that I would have to absolutely do in person. So I'm not spending that money running around. I do miss that because I build, my client relationships that way, but like we're all kind of in it together anyway. But that travel has, like, the omission of that is kind of nice, and the expectations of that I think is going to change in the future for sure. So I'm excited about that. The one thing that I'm actually really curious to ask Ted, because for me, like, the hardest thing, and for my creative directors, this has been a really, really challenging thing, to be able to give people individualized attention, but then also be able to get a sense of exactly what's going on, and when people are struggling but maybe a little shyer and don't speak up versus, it seems like it's been really hard on creative directors. For the individual artists, like, focusing and, you know, pulling the keyframes and doing the work, it hasn't been as hard. But, you know, we can have 10 to 20 jobs going on at a single time. So just like getting through and seeing the updates, and just making sure, if you got to do like a screen share with somebody and really talk through something and work through something, that like hour-long focus session means like you didn't do 6 other things that you needed to do. So it's been really hard on us most of all, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I actually have found that, you know, those one-on-one Zoom sessions have been pretty valuable in the sense that they're a little bit more intimate than the over the shoulder in the studio.
It's true.
So that's the positive, but like you said, it's a lot of that. But I don't know, we're small, you know, and actually we took the opportunity to sort of like pare back and just take work that only works with our staff, and we haven't really hired a freelancer for a year, which is a bummer for our freelance community that we love.
Can you send it to me?
I know, well, that's it. It's always, I mean, it's short. It's a short list, and then we're always doing the same thing. Who do you know?
That's what RevCommunity is for, Aaron. That's why we created RevCommunity, so you guys can share these kind of secrets.
Oh my God.
No, yeah. What an interesting idea, because I think I feel the same way as you do, Aaron. Which is honestly, phone calls were so amazing, and they, for some reason, they always ended on time. Zoom calls, they don't have a time limit in a very weird way. They require more of you just sitting down. I think my hips are totally destroyed in the last 12 months. Because people are expecting this all the time, even for the most minor thing of like, now I have to sit here. So I'm actually breaking that mold. I'm going back to give me your phone number, having phone calls, walking and talking, doing things. It's just time. Like I think we've paid the price and done it. But the investment, I feel like now we go deep into conversation, come back out, breathe for 30 seconds and go back in. And as a business owner, you used to have to like just a rotating door. You could have 3 people in your office waiting while you're in the middle of a conversation. That was kosher. You can't do that in a Zoom call. We're kind of missing some of that normal thing. Very interesting. This has been a great conversation, because there are things that I think we all experience and have, like, we've recognized these little bits and pieces, but it's good to collect them and recognize, one, I love the opportunities that we're hearing. I agree with you, Aaron. The time at home, time with family, not traveling has been a certain benefit. Totally miss it. On the other hand, I miss our cohort dinners and our face-to-face conversations. And sometimes the new clients we've had, we've lost engagement, where we usually can sit in the office and meet them. We've never met them. And so we know things about them, but not that face-to-face stuff. So different and so unique this year has been. But I think it's, you know, great things will come because of it, and things that would have taken way too long are going to show up at our doorstep.
Yeah, I do think it's taught us that we're not as chained to the way of working that we thought we were. If anything, like, to rethink, like, it's okay. I don't know, like, I just feel like, because I've been able to take the time during the year, like, I want to keep taking the time. So maybe I will do Thursday, Fridays at home, and do Monday, Tuesday in the office. Like, well,
I say this all the time. It's like we've made up these rules. A 5-day work week, 8-hour days. Like, why are we living by these rules that we don't need to have? And this is given a moment to say, like, wait a second, there's a new rule I can put in place: a 4-day work week, or a 3 on 2 off day, or just call me when I need to deliver. So I love that part of it. Super exciting.
We've also found like people are just working way more than I mean, again, like, it just seems like productivity is incredible with our artists. And it's almost like you got to stop. Like, you guys got to chill a little bit. Like, it's really been amazing what we've been able to churn out, you know.
Think of how much we all saved in commuting, right? Those of us that used to
Uh-huh.
commute. I mean, that just time just got right back on our calendars. So that's been nice.
Yeah.
Wait, I
And
should
so
wrap
go.
this up here, Tim, because I know we're over our
Yeah.
half-hour point. So if you guys don't mind me politely shutting us down, but obviously this conversation is going to continue. So Aaron, Ted, really great to have you guys jump in.
Thanks, guys.
Let's just make sure we come back in a few weeks or whenever and continue this and see how the story continues to evolve.
I'll be here, same wallpaper.
That's right.
Yeah, and I just want to say too, I appreciate you guys joining us. Appreciate being part of our community and having that lively space. It's kind of nice to have a place we can all go, have these conversations and chat. We thrive because of it. Hope that helps you guys as well.
It does.
All right, everyone. Well, make it a great rest of the week, and we'll hope to see you back next week for another weekly briefing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.